All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for a conversation with Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton and Dr. Chelsea Clinton. I am Gigi Sakubin, and I'm the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion here at Ohio University. One quick housekeeping note about accessibility. To pin the ASL interpreter's video to the top of your screen, right-click the interpreter's video and click the three dots that appear. From the menu that appears, then choose Pin Video. This event will be recorded and made available at ohio.edu/diversity in the coming days. It is indeed a profound honor to welcome such two distinguished guests to our campus as we kick off our 2021 Women's History Month celebration. At a time when our country faces so many challenges, there is no better time than right now to have a conversation about gutsy women in leadership in the 21st century, two of whom are our guests this afternoon. Again, welcome back to Ohio, Madam Secretary and Dr. Clinton, and also a belated birthday, happy birthday to you, Chelsea, as I know you celebrated a birthday this past weekend. My own family shares some history with the Clinton family. My sister Joy was part of the volunteer team for the opening of the Clinton Presidential Library in Little Rock, Arkansas. The day before the opening, I went into labor 3 weeks early. I called Joy from the hospital parking lot, actually crying, to let her know that her first nephew would be coming early. She drove up to Fayetteville that evening, and Jonah was born the next day, November 18th, 2004. So he will forever share a birthday with the Presidential Library. Jonah will be 17 this year. So even though Joy had to miss the opening ceremony, November 18th will always be a special day for my family and I. I have always applied this quote that originated as an African proverb, as well as the title of Secretary Clinton's 1996 book, It Takes a Village, to my own life. As a single mom working in higher education, I have been so eternally grateful for my Arkansas village, my Illinois village, and now our Ohio village, all of whom have played a part in helping my son get to where we are today. In the words from your book, parenthood has the power to redefine every aspect of life, and it has truly done that for me. Thank you and love to you all. I'm now so pleased to introduce Ohio University's Provost and Executive Vice President, Dr. Elizabeth Sayers.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sakubin, and good afternoon. And I am so pleased to welcome you all to this fireside chat to discuss courage, leadership, and resilience. We have two guests with us today about whom I'm guessing you all know a lot already. So I'm going to briefly remind you that Chelsea Clinton is a champion for girls and women through her work with the Clinton Foundation, and she serves as an adjunct assistant professor at Columbia. She's an avid New Yorker, along with her husband and her children. Hillary Rodham Clinton has served, among other things, as Secretary of State, Senator from New York, First Lady of the United States in Arkansas, and as a practicing lawyer, law professor, and author. She's the first woman in US history to become the presidential nominee of a major political party. According to her Twitter profile, she is also a hair icon and a fan of both walks in the woods and standing up for our democracy. I'm very proud to share an alma mater with Secretary Clinton, but I'm even more honored to welcome both her and Chelsea Clinton to Ohio University today. Moderating today's fireside chat is my colleague, Dr. Cindy Anderson. Dr. Anderson is a professor of sociology and chair of the Department of Sociology and Anthropology. She's previously served as chair of Women's, Genders, and Sexuality Studies, and her scholarly expertise spans areas from the rural labor market to women in the workplace. And we're fortunate to have her join us today to facilitate our discussion. Dr. Anderson?
Dr. Anderson, I think you're still on mute.
Oh, okay. Thank you, everyone. I would like to echo Vice President Sakubin and Provost Sayers' welcome to Secretary Hillary Clinton and Dr. Chelsea Clinton. Secretary Clinton, I know you visited Athens several times before. I think the last time that we saw you was about 5 years ago at our local Jackie O's Brewery and Tap Room. So many Athenians have fond memories of that visit. I wish we could be holding this fireside chat at that tap room, sharing a beer with you and Chelsea on this sunny afternoon, but we are so grateful for your virtual visit. To kick off Women's History Month, we've invited you here to talk about the women in leadership. The two of you co-authored a book, Gutsy Women, Favorite Stories of Courage and Resilience. It has 105 stories of women that have made a difference in our world. Women that have resisted the status quo, women that have persisted through male-dominated workplaces, women who broke barriers, women who solved problems, women who braved dangerous conditions. You've included women of all ages, races, sexualities, nationalities, religions, and more. It is an amazing collection of very powerful stories. I want to start by asking you, why did you write this book?
Well, I have to say, Dr. Anderson, that it's such a delight to be virtually back in the Ohio University Athens community. And the reason that we decided to write the book is ever since Chelsea was a little girl, we've been having a conversation about, what makes for a courageous, purposeful life. And particularly talking about women who can be role models in all the dimensions that represents. We had that conversation when she was a little girl, and it's continued all the way to the present. And what we have found, since we've both been privileged to travel across the country over the last several years, is that people are really hungry for stories. They want to understand what came before. What are the kinds of the attributes that they can maybe aspire to, but it's hard to think about that if there aren't enough stories about people that are relatable, that strike a chord. And in talking about it one day, we decided we'd share some of our favorite stories, and it was fascinating because there's a generational difference between us as to people who had been influential in my thinking as a young woman and those who had been really inspiring to Chelsea.
And Dr. Anderson, could I just?
Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I didn't mean to preempt you. Well, first, I want to echo my mom's gratitude to you, Dr. Anderson, and of course to Dr. Sakubin and to everyone for welcoming us so warmly, albeit virtually, kind of into this conversation today. Kind of that we're able to join you, kind of from New York into Athens. Is a gift today, and especially to talk about women who have inspired us during Women's History Month. Some of my earliest memories, Dr. Anderson, are of my mom and my grandmother talking to me about women that were important to them, stories that had helped them have kind of grits and gutsiness throughout their lives. And yet, as my kind of mom was just reflecting, we did have very different experiences growing up. When my mom was growing up, the only women that she knew who worked outside the home were her public school teachers and the public librarians. When I was growing up, my pediatrician was a woman. There was a woman mayor in Little Rock. We will find lots of ways to connect back to Arkansas in this time together today. And so, I did thankfully have so many different role models. And then I, of course, had my mom and my grandmother, who were both incredibly gutsy in their own lives. And so I just am now hyper aware, especially as a parent, of the stories that I want to bring into my children's lives. I have a daughter and then two sons. And I really want my sons to grow up kind of looking up to women as role models too, to help kind of galvanize them in their own lives. And I see it happening already, albeit mainly my 4-year-old. If you ask him, like, a woman he admires, he's probably as likely to say Wonder Woman as anyone else. But at least kind of he very much appreciates her strength and her fortitude. So I see how much the role models that we bring into our children's lives in all the different ways, hopefully that we're able to do so, really matters.
Yeah, thank you. Wonder Woman is fantastic. She's an excellent role model. I love her. Chelsea, I like that in your book you included Athens native Maya Lin, the artist who designed the Vietnam Veteran Memorial, Civil Rights Memorial, and more, including some artwork that's on our own campus. Can you tell us what makes her gutsy?
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, Dr. Anderson, just think about how gutsy it had to be when she was 21 and a student. She entered, the national competition calling for design applications to help kind of imagine what a memorial not only could but should look like, to those that we lost in the Vietnam War. and that she had enough guts to say, like, I can do that. I should do that. I have a really good idea. And she was criticized at the time for, kind of being too presumptuous, that she was too young, that kind of she should wait her turn. And thankfully, she didn't listen to those voices. And she believed in kind of her design. She believed that she was the right person to kind of take that design forward. And so, I think that was such a profound moment, albeit it was over kind of many months of gutsiness. And then that she has continued to kind of marry her activism and her conscience kind of with her art and practice, and that she's been able to do that really all over our country in so many profound ways, whether it's helping to kind of honor indigenous traditions in the Pacific Northwest, or kind of women's rights and women's activists, civil rights. I think it's just a real kind of testament not only to her talent, but also to her gutsiness, that she is helped commemorate and also challenge us with our history in so many different ways.
Yeah, we are very proud of her here and her Athens roots. Secretary Clinton, you include one of my favorite women in this book, Ida B. Wells. And over a century ago, she meticulously documented the lynching of Black men in the South. And she published reports with data demonstrating that this form of racial violence was intended to suppress the progress of Black Americans. If she were alive now, I can't help but think of the important role she would play in continuing our continuing quest for racial justice. What lessons from her story do you think are important today?
Well, Dr. Anderson, I agree with you completely that she is one of the women in our history that we wanted to highlight. Thankfully, she is becoming better known, but I never studied her when I was going to school. I didn't learn about her till much later in my adult life through my own efforts to learn more about women's history and Black history, the post Civil War era in America, Jim Crow, and everything that went with it. And Ida B. Wells is truly one of the most courageous figures in our history. She did, as you say, document the lynching of Black men in the South in the late 19th, early 20th century. She had to really run away from where she was living in Memphis at the time. She'd been born in Mississippi, but then lived in Memphis, where she was part of a community there. She saw some of her friends, some Black men who were building businesses, be unfairly and so tragically interfered with, arrested, and lynched because they were running a competitive store to people who thought they had no right, no business to be in competition with them. She went to Chicago. She continued her pioneering journalism. She wrote about what was happening in not just Illinois, but more broadly in both the advances for Black Americans, but also the setbacks. She became a suffragist. She was on the front lines, literally, when the suffrage movement held a big march in Washington, D.C., and she was one of the active leaders of the Illinois delegation. And Alice Paul, who was trying to be very pragmatic, but came across, as we know, as trying to exclude Black women from prominent roles in the fight for the 19th Amendment. And Alice Paul told Ida B. Wells and the other Black women who were preparing to march in the big suffrage march, that they had to go to the back. And well, Ida B. Wells wasn't going to put up with that. So she just got right into the front, right in a prominent position. She was at the center of the incredible struggle for the rights of Black Americans and the rights of women in our country. and was one of the most consequential figures. And I'm so glad that finally people are really paying attention. I just got in the mail the other day a children's version of her life. So people are starting to, write about her, write her into our history. Because I just want to end with this one point, because you're a professor of sociology and anthropology. You know how important storytelling is to how we see ourselves, how we place ourselves in history. If you don't know about Black Americans or about women who have made a big impact, who have been courageous, who have been gutsy, then you don't understand that we have had a broad tapestry of lives and actions leading us to this point, and that we can learn from it, and we can look back in order to take those lessons to try to continue having, the changes that are necessary when it comes to, racial and gender equality. So Ida B. Wells deserves a front row in any conversation about gutsy women in America.
Yeah, I agree. And you're exactly right about the storytelling, which is why a book like this is so important to get into the hands of a lot of people, because it tells stories that we may not have heard before or stories we need to hear again. And it's just a great read. Chelsea, I wanted to ask you, one of the sections of the book talks about women vaccinators, the doctors, nurses, and public health workers that work tirelessly to eradicate disease here and across the world. What opportunities for women do you see during the current COVID-19 pandemic?
Oh, well, goodness, Dr. Anderson. I think we have to acknowledge, how many opportunities have been lost for women, and how we've lost so much progress on so many different kind of fronts and facets of life here in the United States and around the world on gender equity. I mean, if we think about kind of just recent both kind of job numbers and labor force participation, we know that kind of the job losses during the pandemic, especially over the last few months, have fallen disproportionately on women, and especially on women of color. We know that almost every one of our 1.7 billion students around the world has had their education disrupted. And yet we know that those disruptions have fallen hardest on our most vulnerable students and families. We know that kind of that vulnerability is kind of being experienced especially keenly by mothers here in the United States and across the globe. So I think we just have to be quite candid about how kind of insufficient our kind of our policies and our kind of sense of real kind of support and solidarity was before the pandemic, and how kind of those insufficiencies have been exacerbated through the pandemic. And that kind of, if we are indeed going to build back better, as we hear from President Biden, Vice President Harris, and we have to ensure that equity in every sense and every definition is very much the heart of how we think about our work and then do our work. If I think though about kind of your question about vaccinators, kind of pre-COVID-19, this conversation was largely kind of rooted in routine childhood immunizations here in the United States and across the world. And if we kind of think before now, which we're living through as the largest mass vaccination effort in human history, kind of the previous largest vaccination effort in human history was the effort to eradicate polio, which is still ongoing in the countries where there kind of is wild polio virus, but thankfully is confined to those countries. But kind of in the 1990s, when there was a real focus on ensuring that every child kind of on planet Earth was vaccinated against polio. At the height of the effort in India alone, we had 5 million vaccinators, and overwhelmingly kind of those were women. And if we think about kind of the women on the front lines of vaccinating children against the pneumococcal virus, against pneumonia, against measles, against the rotavirus, which is a leading cause of diarrhea that can lead to dehydration and can be deadly for children under 5 across the world. So many of the people engaged in this work are women. And yet we know that so often that work isn't as kind of valued and supported as I wish it were. It actually is a source of enormous danger for vaccinators. We know that kind of there have been vaccinators who have been harassed and even murdered in many countries around the world, just even over the last decade. And so, when you ask about opportunities, I certainly hope that one of the opportunities emerging out of this moment is a greater appreciation for public health and for the people engaged in the work of public health, so many of whom are women. And I hope that also there is a continued and even more vigorous commitment from the social media platforms to deplatform false information, misinformation around vaccines, and to just completely disallow the harassment of people who are in public health, because we know there has also been a surge of cyber abuse and violence, especially targeting women doctors, women nurses, women public health officials, women vaccinators, really on every corner of the globe. So we have to do more, I think, to help support our vaccinators. It's not just enough to applaud them, although they certainly deserve all of our applause. They really deserve our respect in action, and they deserve protection, I think, from our respective governments across the globe, from the social media companies, and from our individual communities.
Could I add
Yeah.
something, Dr. Anderson?
Yes, please.
Since Chelsea does have a PhD in public health, and as you said in the introduction, teaches at the Mailman School of Public Health at Columbia, she's been a source of great education and information for me. But when I was Secretary of State, one of the challenges we were trying to address was trying to continue the vaccination programs for measles and polio in places where people were misled, where they were told things that weren't true. So I would send a delegation of officials and experts and vaccinators to northern Nigeria to deal with some of the false information, or to support the vaccinators in Pakistan and Afghanistan. And it was something that we were very happy to be part of, because it's in everyone's interest to prevent communicable diseases. And now, of course, we are finding that there are people who, in my opinion, really should know better, who are on social media platforms, spreading false information about vaccines. And it takes a new kind of gutsiness for a lot of people who are in public health, like Chelsea and so many of the people that she knows and that she works with, to take on what is a massive disinformation campaign. So there are lots of ways that we try to highlight the people who have been on the front lines, and as Chelsea said, vaccinating for polio, for measles, in very dangerous places in parts of the world, going in and trying to deal with Ebola in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and because of false information, being mistreated, being run off, even unfortunately being killed. It's just tragic to think that there is this kind of campaign online against people in our own country and in other developed countries to try to prevent vaccines from going forward. So I think it's especially important, and I thank you for highlighting that chapter in our book, because it's very relevant today.
Well, and Dr. Anderson, I want to say too that I think I hope that we will also continue to kind of share the stories and write into history the incredible women scientists who were part of developing both the Pfizer BioNTech and the kind of Moderna vaccines, kind of this, new kind of, into the world, but kind of not new in the sense that kind of these mRNA vaccines have kind of been really worked on for so many years, but just kind of that kind of women scientists were very much kind of at the core of developing these vaccines safely and effectively, but really at unprecedented speed, kind of to match the urgency of this moment. And that kind of what we've learned kind of through this process to help protect us from SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19 is already now being applied to help hopefully kind of protect people from malaria. I think just shows kind of how remarkable science can be when we do have a community of scientists and really kind of the best minds in the world who are working on challenges together. And of course, we can't have the best minds in the world if we're not including women. And so I just really hope too that we continue to kind of share and celebrate the stories of women who have been part of this work, and I'm sure will continue to be part of the development of this kind of new class of vaccinations or vaccines and everything else that kind of may thankfully come from it.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's so important and so relevant that we bring attention to it and value the work and the workers that are doing good to help us move through this pandemic. I know that we have a short amount of time. I do want to ask this particular question. Secretary Clinton, in 2016, you showed the world that the most intelligent, qualified, and experienced candidate for president of the United States not only could be a woman, but was a woman. You were that woman. By your persistence and determination, you showed women all over the United States and the world that women can and should be leading at the highest levels. You gave us hope. What gives you hope when you think about the future your daughter and your grandchildren will face in the next 10 to 20 years?
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Anderson. And, there's a lot that gives me hope. Chelsea just mentioned one thing, science coming to the forefront. We've got to rebuild faith in facts and evidence and science and truth. It's been under assault for a while, unfortunately, in our politics and in certain parts of our media. So it gives me hope when, the reality actually bursts through the wall of denial and disinformation. I'm also very hopeful about the young people who are stepping forward to lead social movements, like the continuing efforts to bring us to the racial reckoning, finally, once again, that is so imperative for us to, learn from what happened last summer with the incredible protests over the killings of George Floyd and others. And those were largely led by young people of all races and backgrounds who were saying we can be so much better than this. I'm also hoping that out of the great, terrible events of January 6th with the storming of our Capitol, we see a return to the study of history and civics. And I'm seeing a lot of that, and I'm very encouraging of that, because if we don't know our history, if we don't know how our government has worked, how we want it to work, it's very difficult in a pluralistic, sprawling democracy like ours to make the decisions that will make us safer and richer and stronger and fairer and more prosperous going forward. So I'm very encouraged by young people who are getting into activism, who are getting into electoral politics, who are on the front lines of research and science and thinking. And I think if we stand with those people who are trying to bring out the best in us, trying to create the kind of future that they deserve, I think we'll be fine. But it's not going to be easy, because there are a lot of forces that you know so well as a sociologist who are working against that sense of community and inclusivity and equity that should be our hallmark, but which unfortunately seems to either upset, anger, or frustrate a lot of people. So we have to stand up for that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I listened to your podcast with Amanda Gorman a few weeks ago, and just her energy and her drive to be presidential candidate in 2036. It's a wonderful energy and light. I'm going to end and refer to a quote in your book where you say, "Here's to gutsy women. May we know them, may we be them, may we raise them, and may we thank and celebrate them." On behalf of Ohio University and the Athens community, I want to thank you both, Secretary Hillary Clinton and Dr. Chelsea Clinton, for modeling leadership and showing us what it means to be gutsy women. And now Ohio University President Nellis will say a few words in closing.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Anderson, for being moderator today. And of course, a very, very special thanks to Secretary Clinton and Dr. Chelsea Clinton for your inspiring words and very thoughtful discussion. We appreciate you both so much for volunteering your time to speak here at Ohio University virtually. I want to also call attention to our sign language interpreters, Shannon Davies and Mia Engel. Thank you so much for your efforts. Thanks also to Dwayne Bruce and Pat Bungard for all the work behind the scenes this afternoon. In addition, I'd like to thank the Little Professor Book Center for having the Book of Gutsy Women available to all of you. So I hope you take a look at that. Today's event is part of a series of Women's History Month events at Ohio University. Our full schedule is posted on our Women's History Month website. My thanks to our Division of Diversity and Inclusion for coordinating this very special event and the special events that will continue throughout this month. Thank you again so much, Secretary Clinton, and again, Dr. Chelsea Clinton. We're so pleased and honored to have you here today. Thank you for your comments, and thank you everyone for participating today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Stay safe, everyone. Thank you.